That night descended upon Ouagadougou's sky like a curse made manifest. The rain fell with such ferocity that it seemed the heavens had decided to wash away every wound the earth had ever suffered. The unpaved roads had become rivers of mud and water, their boundaries dissolved into the darkness. Tree branches trembled violently against the wind's assault, their leaves surrendering to forces beyond their control. In that suffocating darkness, a woman was running, barefoot, her clothes torn and hanging from her frame like discarded rags, her hands pressed firmly against her swollen belly. Her name was Maria, and she carried within her 8 months of hope wrapped in fear. Her lips were cracked and bleeding, her eyes held a terror that transcended even the fear of death itself. It was the fear of a mother who knew that if she stopped, if she surrendered to exhaustion, her child might never draw breath in this world. She didn't know where she was going. The streets of Ouagadougou had become a labyrinth of shadows and rain, every corner looking the same, every alley promising either salvation or doom. But she knew one thing with absolute certainty. She could not stop. Behind her, somewhere in that storm, was a man who had promised her death. Ahead of her, somewhere in that same storm, might be a chance at life. The rain plastered her hair to her face, mixing with tears she hadn't realized she was crying. Each step sent sharp pains through her bare feet as they struck stones and debris hidden beneath the water. Her breath came in ragged gasps, her lungs burning with the effort of breathing for two while running for both their lives. The baby kicked inside her, as if sensing the urgency, as if urging her forward. Thunder crashed overhead, so loud it seemed to shake the very foundations of the earth. Lightning illuminated the world in stark, brief flashes, revealing for split seconds the desperate landscape around her. Abandoned market stalls, shuttered windows, streets emptied by the storm's fury. In one of those flashes, she saw it. A light, distant but unmistakable. A red bulb swinging above what looked like a large wooden gate, fighting against the wind's attempts to extinguish it. Maria's heart, which had been pounding with fear, now added a note of desperate hope to its rhythm. She changed direction, her feet splashing through deeper puddles, ignoring the pain as she ran toward that beacon. As she drew closer, she could make out the sign hanging beside the red light. The letters swam in her rain-blurred vision, but she could read them. Lions of the Desert. It was an old military barracks, now converted into quarters for regular soldiers. From within came the sounds of life. Laughter, the clang of metal cookware, the crackling of burning wood, and the rich smell of food being prepared. Maria stumbled the last few steps to the gate. Her hands, shaking from cold and exhaustion, pushed against the heavy wooden door. It resisted for a moment, as if questioning whether she truly wanted to cross this threshold, whether she was ready for whatever lay beyond. Then it swung open. The scene inside froze like a photograph. Soldiers gathered around a fire, playing cards, sharing stories, preparing their evening meal. All of it stopped. Every face turned toward the doorway where Maria stood, water streaming from her clothes and hair, forming a pool at her feet. She was a ghost materialized from the storm, a specter of desperation that had invaded their sanctuary of warmth and camaraderie. For a moment that stretched into eternity, no one moved. Maria's legs began to tremble, threatening to give way beneath her. Her vision started to blur at the edges, darkness creeping in from all sides. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. Her hands instinctively moved to cradle her belly, as if she could protect her unborn child through sheer force of will alone. Then one man stepped forward from the group. He was different from the others, not in his uniform, which was standard military issue, but in the weight he carried in his eyes. This was a man who had seen things, done things, survived things that had left marks invisible to everyone, but those who knew to look for them. Captain Ibrahim Traoré stood perhaps 6 feet tall, his frame lean but strong, shaped by years of military discipline. His face bore the weathered look of someone who had spent countless hours under the African sun, but there was something else there too, a gentleness that seemed at odds with his profession. In his eyes, behind the weariness and the shadow of old memories, there was an ember of something precious, humanity that hadn't been extinguished by all the violence he'd witnessed. When Ibrahim looked at Maria, he saw more than a wet, desperate woman. He saw a memory. The pain in her eyes was the same pain he had seen in his mother's face years ago when terrorists had burned his village to the ground. He had been just a boy then, too young to save her, too powerless to do anything but watch and remember. That memory had burned itself into his soul, and every time he saw suffering, that old wound opened again. "Bring her inside." Ibrahim's voice cut through the silence with quiet authority. "No questions. Just do it." The soldiers moved immediately, two of them rushing forward to support Maria as her legs finally gave out. They caught her before she could fall, their strong arms becoming the pillars that held her upright. They guided her across the threshold, away from the storm's fury and into the warmth of the barracks. Outside, the rain continued its relentless assault on the world. But inside, in that old military building that smelled of wood smoke and simple cooking, a new flame had been lit. It was small, fragile, barely more than a spark, but it was the flame of humanity, and it would prove to be far more powerful than anyone in that room could have imagined. Maria's wet clothes clung to her body, emphasizing her condition, making her vulnerability even more apparent. Blue-black bruises marked her arms, fingerprints of violence left by hands that should have protected rather than harmed. Her breathing was shallow, rapid, the sound of someone who had been running not just through the storm, but from something far more terrible than weather. Ibrahim removed his own blanket from his shoulders, a thick, wool covering that still held the warmth of his body. He draped it around Maria with a gentleness that seemed incongruous with his military bearing. Then he guided her to a small, empty room off the main area, a space usually reserved for storage but clean enough to serve as temporary shelter. "Sit here," he said softly. "You're safe now." Those 3 words, "You're safe now," seemed to break something inside Maria. She collapsed onto the simple wooden chair as if the weight of carrying both her body and her terror had finally become too much. For the first time in what might have been hours or days or weeks, she allowed herself to simply sit, to simply be. A sob escaped her throat, then another, until she was crying silently, her shoulders shaking beneath the blanket. Corporal Kofi, a young soldier with kind eyes and a quick smile, appeared in the doorway with a cup of hot tea. He approached carefully, as one might approach a wounded animal, and placed the cup in Maria's trembling hands. She wrapped her fingers around it, drawing in the warmth, letting it seep into her chilled bones. "My husband," she began, her voice barely above a whisper, as if speaking the words too loudly might summon the man himself. "Carlos, he's not a soldier, but he's an animal captain. I ran away. He said my baby shouldn't be allowed to live because he wants to keep me caged. He wants to own me like property, and a baby would give me a reason to be strong, to resist. So he tried to—" She couldn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. The bruises spoke eloquently enough. The terror in her eyes filled in the gaps her words couldn't cross. Ibrahim's face remained carefully neutral, but those who knew him well could see the storm building behind his calm exterior. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, his hands resting at his sides clenched into brief fists before consciously relaxing. When he spoke, his voice was quiet but carried the weight of an unbreakable vow. "As long as I draw breath," he said, each word deliberate and clear, "no one will lay a hand on you." That night, on the soil of Burkina Faso, more than just rain and mud remained. Hope had taken root, small and fragile, but undeniably present. It was a hope that would grow, that would spread, that would eventually awaken the conscience of an entire nation. But in that moment, it was just one frightened woman, one unborn child, and one soldier who had remembered what it meant to be human. The night deepened around them. The rain showed no signs of stopping, as if the sky had an infinite reservoir of tears to shed. Lightning continued to flash across the sky, briefly illuminating the barracks walls with ghostly light. Maria sat wrapped in her borrowed blanket, leaning against the wall, jumping slightly each time the wind howled around the building's corners. Her lips moved in constant silent prayer. "God, save my child. Just save my child." Outside, Ibrahim stood guard. He was a warrior, trained to face enemies with weapons, taught to react with precision and lethal force when necessary. But tonight's enemy was different. Tonight he faced not bullets or bombs, but the violence men inflicted on those they claimed to love. It was an enemy that couldn't be shot, couldn't be outmaneuvered, could only be stood against with moral courage and the refusal to turn away. He spoke quietly to Kofi. "If any stranger approaches, tell me immediately." The young corporal nodded, understanding the seriousness in his captain's tone. Something in the air felt wrong, charged with more than just the electricity of the storm. Both men had survived long enough to trust their instincts, and their instincts were screaming warnings into the night. Those instincts proved correct. Perhaps an hour after Maria had arrived, the sound of a heavy truck engine began to penetrate the rain's steady roar. The soldiers became alert immediately, hands moving to weapons, bodies positioning themselves in defensive stances learned through years of training and hard experience. Bright headlights cut through the rain and darkness, flooding the barracks entrance with harsh white light. A truck door opened and a man emerged. He was large, broad-shouldered, his movements aggressive even in the simple act of exiting a vehicle. In his hand, a pistol. In his eyes, the dangerous certainty of someone who believed he owned another human being. "Maria!" he bellowed into the night, his voice competing with the thunder. "Where is Maria?" "She's my wife!" "She belongs to me." Ibrahim stepped out of the barracks into the rain. Water immediately began streaming down his face, but he didn't blink, didn't waver. His rifle remained pointed at the ground, not a gesture of submission but of control. He was the one in command here, and his posture made that clear. "Lower your weapon," Ibrahim said calmly. "State your business here." Carlos laughed, a harsh sound devoid of genuine humor. "You don't understand, Captain. That woman is mine. Property that ran away. I've come to retrieve what belongs to me and to teach her the price of disobedience." Ibrahim took a measured step forward. The rain ran down his face like tears he refused to shed, but his voice remained steady as stone. "Women are not property. A man who raises his hand against a pregnant woman is not a man at all. He's a coward, hiding behind strength he hasn't earned." Carlos's face contorted with rage. He raised the pistol, pointing it directly at Ibrahim. For a heartbeat, the world held its breath. Then Kofi and two other soldiers moved with the fluid precision of trained warriors. They had Carlos on the ground in seconds, the pistol knocked from his hand and lying useless in the mud. Ibrahim knelt beside the fallen man, his voice quiet but carrying more weight than any shout could have managed. "A nation whose men keep their women in fear can never be truly strong. Real power comes from protecting the vulnerable, not from dominating them." Kofi secured Carlos's hands behind his back with practiced efficiency. Ibrahim straightened and gave his order. "Contact the police. Tell them we have a domestic violence situation. This woman is now under our protection, and she will remain so." Inside, Maria had heard everything. Tears streamed down her face, not tears of fear this time, but of relief so profound it felt almost like pain. When the police arrived and took Carlos away, his protests echoing into the stormy night, she emerged slowly from the room that had become her sanctuary. She approached Ibrahim with hesitant steps, as if afraid he might prove to be a dream that would dissolve if she moved too quickly. When she spoke, her voice trembled with emotion. "You saved my life, sir." Ibrahim looked at her with gentle eyes. "Perhaps, Maria. But maybe you saved something in us, too. You reminded us that humanity still exists, that it's worth fighting for." The night passed slowly, measured in heartbeats and prayers rather than minutes and hours. When the sun's first rays finally touched the barracks grounds, a strange calm settled over everything. The rain had stopped, leaving the world washed clean, smelling of wet earth and new possibilities. But Ibrahim knew this wasn't an ending. This was barely even a beginning. This was the first page of a story that would change not just Maria's life, but the destiny of everyone it touched. He stood at the window, watching the sunrise paint the sky in shades of gold and pink, and wondered what price would ultimately be demanded for the choice he'd made that night. He didn't have to wonder long. The answer was coming, carried on the wind, written in the looks exchanged by his soldiers, present in Maria's grateful tears. The price would be everything, and somehow, standing there in the morning light, Ibrahim knew it would be worth it. The morning sun spread a gentle golden glow across Ouagadougou's sky. The rain had ceased its assault, but the ground remained saturated, puddles reflecting the clearing clouds like scattered mirrors. In the barracks courtyard, soldiers sat with cups of tea in their hands, their conversations muted, thoughtful. Everyone was thinking about the same thing, the woman who had arrived in the storm and what her presence meant. Captain Ibrahim Traoré opened his office door to find Maria sitting quietly inside. She held a cup of warm tea in her hands, positioned near a small fire that crackled with burning wood. Her face showed exhaustion mixed with peace, two opposite states somehow coexisting in her expression. "I never thought anyone would believe me," she said softly. Every door was closed. "But you opened yours." Ibrahim interrupted gently before she could continue. "I didn't do anything extraordinary. Maria, I simply did what every human being should do, recognize another person's suffering and refuse to look away." Silence settled over the room for several moments. Outside, children's laughter drifted through the window. Probably soldiers' kids playing in the morning sun, their joy unmarked by knowledge of the night's drama. Maria stood and looked out at them, and for the first time since Ibrahim had known her, she smiled. "How fortunate they are," she observed, "to breathe without fear." Ibrahim considered her words carefully before responding. "The fortunate aren't those who have no fear, Maria. The fortunate are those who continue living despite their fear. And you're one of them." That evening, the soldiers prepared a meal for Maria. One cooked rice, another grilled fish, someone else brought an old but clean blanket for her bed. It was the first time these hardened military men had come together like this, not as soldiers, but as human beings caring for another human being. Kofi laughed as he arranged plates. "Captain, sir, I think you've changed us. We're not just fighters anymore." Ibrahim smiled, a rare expression that softened his weathered features. "Becoming truly human is the hardest battle of all, Kofi, and you're winning it." Time passed. 2 days became 3, then more. Maria's condition improved gradually. She began spending time in the barracks' small garden, sitting among the trees, watching birds, occasionally throwing them scraps of bread. The soldiers started calling her sister, a term of respect and affection. When she laughed, it seemed to heal old wounds none of them had realized they carried. One day, Ibrahim gave her an old radio. "This belonged to my father," he explained. "He used to say that when your voice is silenced, you must keep hope alive in your heart." This radio was his way of staying connected to the world, of remembering that he wasn't alone. Maria accepted the radio with trembling hands. Tears formed in her eyes, catching the light. "Captain, sir, sometimes I feel like God sent you as an answer to my prayers." Ibrahim smiled faintly. "Perhaps your child's destiny brought you here. Perhaps this was always meant to happen." At that moment, thunder rumbled in the distance. Lightning flashed across the sky. Ibrahim moved to the window and looked out at the gathering clouds. Something was coming. He could feel it in his bones, in the way the air pressure changed, in the restless stirring of the wind. A new chapter was about to begin, a new test to face. He didn't know yet that the coming night would challenge both his heart and his duty in ways he'd never imagined. Night shadows spread across Burkina Faso's landscape like spilled ink. The air carried moisture, promising more rain, and in the distance, frogs created a symphony of croaking that echoed across the darkness. Inside the barracks, silence reigned. But Captain Ibrahim Traoré felt an inexplicable unease settling into his chest like a physical weight. He sat at his desk, reviewing reports when Kofi burst into the room, panic written across his usually calm face. "Captain, sir! It's Maria. Her condition has suddenly deteriorated." Ibrahim's pen fell from his fingers, clattering against the wooden desk. He was on his feet immediately, striding quickly toward the room where Maria had been staying. His heart pounded with a fear different from what he'd felt in combat. This was the fear of helplessness, of watching suffering he might not be able to prevent. The room was dim. This was different from combat. In battle, Ibrahim knew what to do. His training took over. His body moved through practiced motions. His mind calculated strategies and responses. But here, facing the raw reality of childbirth complicated by trauma and fear, he felt utterly inadequate. All his military training hadn't prepared him for this moment of profound human vulnerability. He soaked a cloth in water and placed it on Maria's forehead, remembering vaguely that this might provide some comfort. Maria's screams echoed through the barracks, each one cutting through the soldiers gathered outside like a physical blow. They were men trained to face enemy fire without flinching. But this sound, the sound of a woman in desperate pain, left them shaken and uncertain. One young soldier spoke up, his voice unsteady. "Captain, sir, we've never seen anything like this." Ibrahim didn't look up from Maria, didn't break his focus as he continued trying to provide what little comfort he could. "This is the real battle, brother. Not fought with guns, but with prayers and determination and the refusal to surrender to despair." Time seemed to stop. Every second stretched into an eternity. The rain hammered against the roof and walls, nature's own desperate symphony accompanying Maria's struggle. Ibrahim found himself praying. Really praying, not the rote recitations of childhood, but desperate pleas from the depths of his soul. "Let this child live. Let them both live. Please." Finally, after what felt like hours but might have been less, an elderly nurse arrived from a nearby village. She was perhaps 70 years old, her face deeply lined with age and wisdom, her movements careful but confident. She had delivered hundreds of babies in her life, had seen countless women through this ancient trial. She took charge immediately, her weathered hands moving with practiced skill, her voice firm as she gave instructions. The soldiers, these men who commanded troops and faced armed enemies, scrambled to follow her orders like recruits on their first day of training. "Boil water. Bring clean cloths. Move the lamp closer. Hold this. Stay back. Give her air." The hours crawled past with agonizing slowness. Maria's strength seemed to ebb with each passing minute, her cries growing weaker, her periods of consciousness becoming shorter. Ibrahim stayed nearby, feeling more helpless than he'd ever felt in his life, wishing he could trade places with her, take some of this burden onto himself. Then, just as the sun's first light began to filter through the window, that delicate pink and gold light that promises new beginnings, a different cry filled the room. Not Maria's cry of pain, but a baby's cry of life. Thin, reedy, but unmistakably real, unmistakably alive, the sound seemed to stop time itself. Every person in the barracks froze, afraid to move, afraid that any motion might shatter this fragile miracle. Then the elderly nurse smiled, a smile that transformed her weathered face into something almost young, and lifted a tiny, squirming bundle wrapped in a clean cloth. "A boy," she announced simply, as if she hadn't just witnessed something extraordinary. Maria, exhausted beyond measure, managed to open her eyes. Tears streamed down her face, mixing with the sweat of her labor. "My baby. Is he alive?" Her voice was barely audible, scraped raw from screaming. Ibrahim, who had maintained his composure through firefights and explosions, found his own vision blurring with tears. "Yes, Maria, your son is alive. You fought death itself and won." The nurse placed the baby in Maria's arms with infinite gentleness. The infant's eyes were closed, his tiny fists waving aimlessly, his chest rising and falling with the rhythm of new life. Maria stared at him as if he were the only thing in the universe, as if the entire world had shrunk to the size of this small, miraculous person. Ibrahim watched the scene, something shifting deep in his chest. In all his years of military service, he had never felt this profound sense of witnessing something truly important. Battles won and lost suddenly seemed insignificant compared to this. One woman, one child surviving against terrible odds. He spoke quietly, almost to himself. "Perhaps this child isn't just yours, Maria. Perhaps he's a symbol of our hope, proof that goodness can still triumph." But even as these words left his mouth, Kofi appeared in the doorway, his face grave. He waited until Ibrahim noticed him, then gestured for the captain to step outside. In the corridor, Kofi spoke in a low, urgent voice. "Captain, we have a problem. Armed men have been spotted in the area over the past 2 days. The report suggests they're looking for someone, probably Maria. Word has spread about what happened here, and there are people who aren't happy about it. Ibrahim's moment of peace evaporated, replaced by cold military pragmatism. His jaw tightened, his eyes hardened. He was a protector again, not just a witness to life's miracles. Then we prepare. If they come, they'll find we're not so easy to overcome. But this time, Kofi, we fight not to destroy but to protect. Remember that distinction. The following night was unnaturally quiet. Even the birds seemed to have abandoned the trees around the barracks, as if nature itself sensed the coming conflict. Captain Ibrahim had doubled the guard, positioned his soldiers strategically, and prepared contingency plans. But beneath all the military preparation, he felt something deeper, a certainty that what happened in the next few hours would define everything that followed. Kofi, peering through binoculars from an elevated position, reported in a tense whisper, "Sir, there's movement on the eastern ridge. Lights from vehicles, possibly 3 or 4. They're maintaining position, not advancing yet." Ibrahim nodded grimly. "Keep watching. If they're the ones we think they are, then tonight we write a new kind of history, not with conquest, but with moral courage." Inside the barracks, Maria sat with her newborn son pressed against her chest. The baby's breathing was soft and regular, the peaceful rhythm of innocent life. She looked up at the darkening sky through the window, her voice barely a whisper. "God, I've lost everything else. But you've given me this one blessing. If there's a price to pay, I'll pay it. Just keep him safe. Please keep him safe." Suddenly, the night exploded with gunfire. Glass shattered, sending deadly shards spinning through the air. Doors rattled on their hinges. Soldiers scrambled to defensive positions, their training overriding their fear. Outside, 2 jeeps had arrived, disgorging masked men armed with automatic weapons. Ibrahim grabbed his rifle, but his eyes remained fixed on one thing: the room where Maria and her baby sheltered. "Kofi, take 2 men and get Maria out through the back entrance. I'll hold them here." Kofi hesitated for only a second. The second it took to understand that his captain was potentially sacrificing himself. Then he nodded and ran, gathering 2 soldiers as he went. The gunfire intensified. With each explosion, mud and smoke filled the air, creating a hellish fog that reduced visibility to mere feet. Ibrahim's chest filled with a single overwhelming emotion: the determination to protect innocence, to stand as a barrier between violence and vulnerability. A bullet grazed his arm, tearing through fabric and skin, leaving a line of burning pain. He barely noticed. He returned fire, his shots precise and controlled, each one aimed not to kill if possible, but to drive the attackers back. He took cover behind a stone wall, reloading with automatic efficiency. "This land will not bow to tyranny," he shouted into the chaos, his voice somehow carrying over the sounds of combat. "No woman will live in fear here, not while we still draw breath." Meanwhile, Kofi had reached Maria. He wrapped her and the baby in a blanket, lifting them both with surprising gentleness for a man of his size. He moved toward the back entrance, his 2 companions providing cover, their bodies positioned to shield Maria from any stray bullets. The ground was treacherous, slick mud that threatened to send them all sliding. Kofi's feet slipped repeatedly, but he never loosened his grip on his precious cargo. Maria clutched her baby to her chest, tears streaming down her face, her voice breaking as she spoke. "The captain. He's alone back there." "He's a warrior, sister," Kofi said firmly, though his own voice carried notes of worry. "He always comes back. Always." Inside the barracks, fire had broken out. Flames licked up the walls, casting dancing shadows that made the scene even more nightmarish. Ibrahim fired his last bullet, then collapsed against the wall, wounded but alive. The attackers were retreating, whether because they'd been driven off or because they'd achieved some other goal. He couldn't tell and didn't care. Rain began to fall again, as if the sky were trying to wash away the blood and smoke, to cleanse the ground of violence's stain. When Kofi returned, having secured Maria in a safe location, he found his captain sitting against the wall, one hand pressed against the wound on his shoulder, his face streaked with mud and blood, but his eyes clear and calm. "Maria and the baby?" Ibrahim asked immediately. "Safe, sir. Hidden where they won't be found." Ibrahim looked up at the rain-filled sky, letting the water wash over his face. Thank God. Today we didn't take lives, we saved them. Remember this feeling, Kofi. This is what we should be fighting for. In the darkness beyond the barracks, Maria sat in a small storage building, the baby quiet in her arms. She looked back toward where she knew Ibrahim was, toward where the sounds of battle had finally faded, and she understood that this night would be carved into her heart forever. A night when one man had stood against violence, not with greater violence, but with the simple, powerful decision that some things, like the life of a mother and child, were worth any sacrifice. Dawn broke gray and tentative, as if the sun itself was uncertain about rising on this particular day. An ambulance sat outside the barracks, its red lights rotating slowly, painting everything in alternating shades of crimson and shadow. Soldiers stood in respectful silence as their captain was carefully placed on a stretcher. Ibrahim Traoré's shoulder bore a deep wound, still seeping blood despite the field dressing applied. But his face showed peace. The peace that comes only to those who know they've fulfilled their duty, regardless of the cost. Kofi knelt beside the stretcher, his voice thick with emotion. "Sir, rest now. We'll handle everything," Ibrahim managed a smile. "I know you will, Kofi. But remember, we're not just guardians of land. We're guardians of humanity itself. Never forget that." The ambulance doors closed. The engine roared to life. As the vehicle pulled away, carrying Ibrahim toward the military hospital, he lay back and closed his eyes, letting the night's images replay in his mind. The rain, the gunfire, the screams, and then that other sound, the tiny cry of new life that had made everything worthwhile. That baby, he murmured to himself. That's the real victory. That's what matters. At the hospital, doctors worked on him for hours, extracting the bullet fragment that had lodged in muscle tissue, cleaning and stitching the wound, monitoring his vital signs. When they finally wheeled him to a recovery room, Ibrahim felt hollowed out, exhausted in ways that went beyond physical tiredness. He was drifting in and out of consciousness when he heard his room door open. Through half-closed eyes, he saw Kofi enter, followed by a figure he recognized immediately. Maria moved slowly, carefully, still recovering from childbirth. In her arms, wrapped in a blue blanket, was the baby, the child whose life had cost so much and meant even more. Maria approached the bed with hesitant steps. Her face had changed in the days since Ibrahim had first seen her in the storm. The terror was gone, replaced by something softer but no less profound: gratitude, determination, and the fierce protective love of a mother. "Captain," she said softly, "I don't know how to thank you. You saved my life. You gave my son a chance to exist in this world." Ibrahim's lips curved into a weak smile. "Don't thank me, Maria. Perhaps God used us as instruments for each other. You taught me, taught all of us that true strength isn't found in weapons. It's found in mercy." Maria lifted the baby closer, letting Ibrahim see him clearly. The infant's eyes were open now, dark and somehow wise, seeming to look directly at the wounded soldier. "I've given him a name," Maria said. "I call him Umid. It means hope." Ibrahim reached out with his good arm, his large, calloused hand incredibly gentle as he touched the baby's tiny fist. The infant's fingers instinctively curled around his thumb, that universal infant grip that has bound hearts since the beginning of human time. Ibrahim felt tears, real tears, slip down his cheeks. "Umid," he repeated. "Hope." Yes, that's exactly the word this land needs most. The soldiers who had gathered outside the room stood at attention, saluting not the military officer but the man who had shown them what true honor looked like. In their hearts, something had fundamentally shifted. They were still warriors, still protectors, but now they understood that the greatest battles weren't always fought with bullets. That evening, as sunset painted the sky in shades of orange and purple, Ibrahim sat by the hospital window and stared out at the city. The rain-washed air carried the scent of wet earth, that ancient smell that speaks of renewal and possibility. He found himself thinking about all the battles he'd fought, all the orders he'd followed, all the times he'd acted without questioning. "Every war involves bloodshed," he said quietly to himself. But true victory comes when you awaken conscience, when you remind people what they're capable of at their best. A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. Kofi entered again, this time carrying an envelope. "Sir, this came for Maria, but she asked that you read it first." Ibrahim opened the envelope carefully, his wounded shoulder protesting the movement. Inside was a single photograph and a brief letter. The photo showed Maria and Umid outside a small but clean dwelling, both of them smiling in the sunlight. Behind them, other women and children could be seen, people who had clearly found some measure of peace and safety. The letter was brief but powerful. "Captain Traoré, I am alive because you believe that even a powerless woman deserves protection. You stood against forces that wanted to silence me, and in doing so, you gave voice to countless others who suffer in silence. I am not the only woman in Burkina Faso who lives in fear. I was simply fortunate enough to find your door. The world needs more men like you, men who understand that true strength protects rather than dominates. Please know that Umid will grow up hearing about your courage, about the night you proved that one person's moral choice can change everything." With endless gratitude, Maria Ibrahim closed his eyes, letting tears fall freely now. They were tears of gratitude, of recognition, of understanding that he had been part of something larger than himself. When he opened his eyes again, his vision was clear, his purpose crystallized. "Kofi," he said, his voice carrying new strength despite his physical weakness. "When I recover, we're going to start something new. We're going to create a mission, a systematic effort to protect women and children throughout Burkina Faso. We'll call it the Hope Mission. We'll work village by village, we'll provide shelter and protection, and we'll make sure that what happened to Maria never has to happen again." Kofi's face broke into a broad smile. "Sir, the men have already been talking about something similar. They're with you. Whatever you need, whenever you need it." 2 weeks passed before Ibrahim was released from the hospital. The doctors had wanted him to stay longer, to ensure complete recovery, but he was restless, driven by purpose that transcended physical healing. His arm remained in a sling, the wound still tender, but his spirit had never been stronger. When he returned to the barracks, he found it transformed. The damage from the attack had been repaired, but more than that, the entire atmosphere had changed. The soldiers moved with new purpose, their conversations focused not on drills and deployment, but on logistics of protection and rescue. They had painted a new sign above the entrance: "Lions of the Desert, Defenders of Hope." That first evening back, Ibrahim called a meeting in the courtyard. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the assembled soldiers. There were perhaps 40 men gathered, ranging from young recruits barely out of their teens to grizzled veterans who had served for decades. Every face showed respect, attention, and something else: eagerness to be part of something meaningful. Ibrahim stood on a small platform, his arm still in its sling, his uniform bearing new insignia he'd designed himself, a lion protecting a mother and child. When he spoke, his voice carried across the silent courtyard with clarity and conviction. "Brothers," he began, "for years we have been soldiers. We have followed orders, defended borders, fought against those designated as enemies. And there is honor in that service, make no mistake. But tonight I ask you to join me in a different kind of battle, one that may prove harder than any combat we've faced." He paused, letting his gaze sweep across the assembled faces. Every eye was locked on him. In Burkina Faso, in our own communities, women and children suffer in silence. They endure violence in their homes, abuse by those who should protect them, fear that robs them of dignity and hope. We have the power to change this, not through legislation, though that will come. Not through politics, though that too has its place, but through direct action, through creating safe havens, through standing as barriers between the vulnerable and those who would harm them. He gestured toward the barracks behind him. This building will become the first Hope Station, a place where any woman or child fleeing violence can find immediate shelter. No questions asked, no judgment rendered. But this is just the beginning. I want to establish Hope Stations throughout Burkina Faso, in every major city, in remote villages, anywhere people need refuge. A young soldier raised his hand hesitantly. "Captain, sir, how will we fund this? The military budget won't cover..." Ibrahim interrupted with a gentle smile. We'll start with what we have. Our own resources, our own time, our own hands building these shelters. Word will spread. Good work attracts support. But even if no external funding ever comes, even if we must do this with nothing but our own labor and dedication, it will be enough. Because this isn't about money, it's about commitment. Kofi stepped forward from the ranks. Captain, I speak for many of us when I say we're ready. Some of us have sisters who have suffered. Some have mothers who endured. Some have daughters we worry about. This mission, it's personal for all of us. A murmur of agreement rippled through the assembled soldiers. Ibrahim felt emotion rising in his chest, but kept his voice steady. Then tomorrow we begin. Teams of 3 will rotate. One team maintaining security here, one team conducting outreach in nearby villages, one team training in conflict de-escalation and trauma support. Every 2 weeks we rotate. Every soldier becomes proficient in both protection and compassion. As the meeting concluded and soldiers dispersed to their quarters, several approached Ibrahim individually. One older veteran, a man named Amadou with scars marking both his face and his soul, grasped Ibrahim's good hand firmly. Captain, Amadou said, his voice rough with emotion, I've fought in 4 wars. I've seen things that haunt my sleep. But what you're proposing, this might be the first truly just cause I've ever served. Thank you for giving my service meaning. Ibrahim squeezed the man's hand. Thank you for being willing, Amadou. Your experience will be invaluable. The violence we're fighting is different, but your courage is exactly what we need. That night, Ibrahim couldn't sleep. He sat at his desk, sketching plans, making lists, working through logistics by lamplight. How many women could they shelter at once? What supplies were essential? How would they handle medical emergencies? What about education for children who came with their mothers? The questions were endless, but rather than overwhelming him, they energized him. Around midnight, there was a soft knock at his door. Come in, he called. Maria entered, carrying a tray with tea and simple bread. I saw your light still burning, she explained. Thought you might need sustenance. Ibrahim accepted gratefully, realizing he hadn't eaten since morning. As Maria set down the tray, she hesitated, then spoke. Captain, may I ask you something? Of course. Why are you doing this, really? You could have simply helped me that one night and been done with it. You could have returned to normal military duties. Instead, you're risking your career, maybe your life, to help people you don't even know. Why? Ibrahim was quiet for a long moment, considering how to articulate something he felt deeply but had never fully verbalized. Finally, he spoke. When I was 8 years old, my village was attacked. Terrorists came in the night, burning homes, killing anyone who resisted. My father fought them. He died protecting us. My mother, she survived, but something in her died that night. I watched the light go out of her eyes. She lived another 10 years, but she was never really alive again. He paused, his own eyes distant with memory. I became a soldier, thinking I could prevent such things from happening. I thought if I was strong enough, well-trained enough, vigilant enough, I could protect people. But I was fighting the wrong enemy. The terrorists were visible, obvious. But the violence happening in homes every day, that was invisible. And it was killing just as surely as any bullet. Maria's eyes glistened with tears. Your mother, what happened to her? She died when I was 18. Officially, it was illness. But I believe she died of accumulated sorrow, of carrying too much pain for too long with no one to share the burden. Ibrahim looked directly at Maria. When I saw you that night, running through the rain, I saw my mother. I saw the chance I never had, to actually save someone, to make a real difference. I couldn't save her, but I could save you. And maybe, if we do this right, we can save countless others. Maria was crying openly now. She moved around the desk and embraced Ibrahim carefully, mindful of his injured shoulder. Then we'll do it together, she said. Ahmed and I were part of this mission too. You gave us life. Now we give our lives to this cause. The Hope Mission's first outreach expedition departed at dawn 3 days later. 3 soldiers, Kofi, Amadou, and a young recruit named Joseph, rode in a military jeep that had been repainted to look less threatening. Gone was the camouflage pattern, replaced with simple blue and white colors. A banner on the side declared, Hope Mission, Safety, Protection, Dignity. Their destination was a village called Tiebele, about 50 kilometers south of Ouagadougou. Intelligence reports, gathered carefully through informal networks, suggested that several women in Tiebele were trapped in abusive situations but had nowhere to turn. The village elder was reportedly sympathetic but felt powerless to intervene in family matters. As they drove through the countryside, passing fields being prepared for planting and scattered compounds of circular mud homes with thatched roofs, Kofi noticed Joseph's nervousness. The young man kept fidgeting with his uniform, adjusting and readjusting his cap. "First time on this kind of mission?" Kofi asked gently. Joseph nodded. "Yes, Corporal. I'm not sure what to say to them. In combat, you shoot, you take cover, you follow orders. But this? How do you talk to someone about the worst things in their life?" Amadou, driving, spoke without taking his eyes off the rough road. "You listen, boy. That's the first rule. You don't come in with solutions. You don't judge. You don't tell them what they should have done. You listen like their words are the most important thing in the world, because in that moment they are. And then?" Joseph asked. "Then you offer options," Kofi added. "Not orders, options. We can provide shelter. We can provide protection. We can help them file complaints with authorities. But we never force. The goal is to give power back to people who've had it taken away. If we make decisions for them, we're just replacing one form of control with another." They arrived in Tiebele as the morning was warming into true day. The village was small, perhaps 50 families, built in the traditional Kasana architecture, with elaborately decorated walls featuring geometric patterns painted in earth tones. Children ran between the compounds, chickens pecked at the ground, and women moved between tasks with the efficiency born of long practice. An elderly man approached as they parked the jeep. His face was lined with years and wisdom, his posture stooped but his eyes sharp. This was the village elder, Chief Bukari. "Welcome," he said formally. "We received word that you might come. You are the soldiers who help women?" Kofi stepped forward respectfully. "We are, Chief. But we come not as soldiers today, but as servants. We've heard that some in your village might benefit from knowing about the refuge we offer." Chief Bukari's expression was complicated, relief mixed with apprehension. "Come," he said. "We will talk. There are things happening in this village that shame me, but which I have not known how to address." They gathered in the chief's compound, sitting on low stools in the shade of a massive baobab tree. As they talked, women began to gather at a distance, curious but cautious. Chief Bukari explained the situation with painful honesty. "We have 3 women here who suffer greatly. One is beaten by her husband whenever he drinks, which is often. One is kept locked in her compound, not permitted to speak to neighbors or even attend the market. The third—" He paused, his voice dropping. "The third is only 15. She was married to a man of 40, and she has tried twice to run away. Each time she was returned and punished." Kofi felt anger rising in his chest, but forced himself to remain calm. This was exactly the situation the Hope Mission existed to address. "Chief, would these women speak with us?" "I will ask. But understand, they are afraid. The men in question are powerful in the village. They have relatives, alliances. If the women speak and nothing changes, their situations will become worse." "That's why we offer refuge," Amadou said firmly. "We don't just talk and leave. If a woman chooses to come with us, she and any children she has will be protected. The men will not be able to reach them. We guarantee this." The chief studied them for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Wait here. I will speak with them." An hour passed. The sun climbed higher and the day grew hot. Joseph shared water from their supplies with children who had gathered to stare at the strange soldiers with the friendly banner. Kofi and Amadou sat quietly, conserving energy, mentally preparing for whatever was to come. Finally, Chief Bukari returned. Behind him, walking with hesitant steps, came 3 women. The first was perhaps 30, with bruises visible on her arms. The second was older, her eyes holding the blank quality of someone who had stopped hoping long ago. The third was the girl, impossibly young, her pregnancy obvious beneath her traditional clothing, her face showing equal parts fear and desperate courage. The women sat, none of them making eye contact at first. The silence stretched uncomfortably. Then Kofi spoke, his voice gentle but clear. My name is Kofi. These are my brothers, Amadou and Joseph. We are not here to judge anyone or to force anything. We are here only to tell you that if you want a different life, we can help make it possible. There is a place where you will be safe, where you will be fed and sheltered, where your children will be cared for, where no one will raise a hand against you. The oldest woman spoke first, her voice barely above a whisper. How do we know you speak truth? Men always promise things. They never keep those promises. Because we've already done it, Amadou answered. There is a woman named Maria. She came to us 8 months pregnant, fleeing violence. We protected her. Her baby was born safely. She is alive and well, and she now works with us to help others. She sent this. He pulled from his pocket the photograph Maria had given them, the one showing her and baby Umid, both smiling, both clearly healthy and safe. He passed it to the women, who examined it with intensity, as if trying to determine whether the happiness in the image could possibly be real. The young girl, the 15-year-old, suddenly spoke. Her voice was small but determined. If I go with you, my husband will come. He will bring his brothers. They will hurt people to get me back. Joseph, who had been silent until now, surprised everyone by speaking up. Then they will face soldiers who have sworn to protect you. We are not afraid of bullies who hurt children. Let them come. They will learn that some things are not negotiable. Something in the young girl's expression shifted. A tiny flame of hope appeared in her eyes. You would really fight for me? I am nothing. I am nobody's daughter now. I was sold to my husband for money to feed my siblings. Kofi leaned forward, his voice intense with conviction. You are not nothing. You are a human being with dignity and rights. And yes, we will fight for you. Not with violence if we can avoid it, but with absolute determination. No one will take you back to that man against your will. This I promise on my honor. The three women looked at each other, some unspoken communication passing between them. Finally, the first woman, the one with bruises, spoke. If we go with you today, right now, we cannot return. Everything we have ever known will be left behind. Yes, Kofi acknowledged. It's a hard choice. Perhaps the hardest you'll ever make. We cannot promise it will be easy, but we can promise you'll be safe. And we can promise that your lives will be your own. Another silence, heavy with the weight of life-changing decisions. Then slowly the young girl stood. I will go. I will not spend one more night in that place. The other two women stood as well, almost as if the girl's courage had given them permission to access their own. We go too, said the oldest. God help us all, but we go too. Chief Bukari, who had been watching silently, now spoke with surprising firmness. You have my blessing. I will handle the men. I am still chief here, and it is time I remembered what that means. These women are under my protection until they leave the village. Any man who objects will answer to me and the council. What followed was a flurry of rapid activity. The women were given 30 minutes to gather essential belongings. Not much, as they owned little. Children were collected. Tears were shed. Hurried farewells were exchanged with female relatives who whispered prayers and blessings. Word spread through the village quickly, and as the jeep prepared to depart, an angry crowd of men began to gather. The young girl's husband pushed to the front, his face purple with rage. That girl is my property. I paid bride price. She belongs to me. Chief Bukari stepped between the man and the jeep, his aged frame suddenly seeming larger, more commanding. She is not property. She is a child who should be in school, not forced into marriage. You have violated custom and decency. Be grateful I am not calling authorities to have you arrested. You old fool! You have no power to— The chief's voice cracked like a whip. I have every power. I am chief, and I declare these women free to choose their own paths. Challenge me if you dare, but know that you challenge tradition itself, which says a chief's word in matters of justice is final. The crowd rumbled with uncertainty. Some men seemed ready to attack, but others, particularly older men who remembered when the chief had been a warrior in his youth, held back. The moment balanced on a knife's edge, Amadou started the engine. Kofi kept his rifle visible but pointed at the ground, a warning without a direct threat. Joseph helped the women and children into the back of the jeep, positioning himself as a shield between them and the angry crowd. Go! Chief Bukari commanded. I will maintain order here. These women are under Hope Mission protection now. May God guide you all. The jeep lurched forward, pushing through the crowd that reluctantly parted. Angry shouts followed them, and one man threw a rock that bounced off the jeep's side panel. But no one tried to physically stop them, held back by some combination of the chief's authority, the soldiers' presence, and perhaps, just perhaps, a dim recognition that what was happening might actually be right. As Tiebele disappeared behind them, the women in the back of the jeep began to cry, not tears of sadness, but of relief so overwhelming it had to find release. The young girl clutched her pregnant belly and whispered over and over, "Thank you, thank you, thank you." Kofi radioed ahead to the barracks. 3 women, 4 children. ETA 40 minutes. Request medical and psychological support standing by. Ibrahim's voice came back steady and warm. Confirmed. Well done, brothers. Bring them home. As they drove through the countryside, the landscape seemed different somehow, still the same fields and villages, but viewed now through the lens of mission accomplished. They had done it. They had actually saved lives today, changed destinies, proved that the Hope mission was more than just words. When they arrived at the barracks, they found Ibrahim waiting with Maria, both of them standing beside medical personnel and volunteers who had responded to calls for help. As the women emerged from the jeep, exhausted and overwhelmed, Maria stepped forward with baby Umid in her arms. "Welcome," she said simply. "You are safe now." "I know because I walked the path you're walking. I know how brave you had to be to make this choice. And I promise you, life begins again from this moment." The young pregnant girl stared at Umid, tears streaming down her face. "Will my baby really be safe?" Maria smiled, genuine warmth radiating from her. "Your baby will be more than safe. Your baby will be free. That's worth everything." That evening, as the new arrivals were settled into clean rooms, given hot meals, and allowed to rest perhaps for the first time in years, Ibrahim gathered his team for a debriefing. Kofi reported every detail of the day's events, including the tense confrontation with the village men. When he finished, Ibrahim was quiet for a moment, thinking. Then he spoke. "Every rescue will have risks. Some villages will be more hostile than Tiebele. Some men will be more violent. We need to be prepared for escalation. But we also need to stay true to our principle. We use force only as an absolute last resort. Our strength comes from moral authority, not from weapons," Captain Joseph ventured. "When that man called the girl his property, I wanted to hit him. I wanted to hurt him for what he'd done. How do we manage that anger?" Ibrahim's expression was understanding. "You feel anger because you have conscience, Joseph. The anger is natural. It means you recognize injustice. But we channel that anger into determination, not violence. The man who hurt that girl, his real punishment isn't a beating. It's that he'll live knowing he lost, that his power over another human being was stripped away. That's justice." Amadou nodded agreement. "And the girl? She gets life, real life. That's the victory." As the meeting concluded, Ibrahim stepped outside into the night air. The sky was clear, stars scattered across the darkness like diamonds on black velvet. He thought about the day's events, about the 3 women and 4 children now sleeping peacefully in the barracks, about the countless others still waiting to be found and saved. Maria joined him, Umid asleep against her shoulder. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the stars. Finally, Maria spoke. "Today you saved 3 women. How many more are out there, Captain? Hundreds? Thousands?" "Too many," Ibrahim admitted. "More than we can ever reach with just 40 soldiers and 1 barracks. But that's not the point. The point is that we reach who we can. Every life saved is infinity to that person. We don't